today the what's the word I want? Incomparable Bob Hill. I'm going to blame it on this dental device in the top of my mouth. And we are so fortunate. All of you know Bob. Most of you know Bob. And today he will speak to us of embracing the unknown. Thank you, Bob.
As we were resetting the clocks last night, I thought of two events about the time change in this church. Sorry. The first, I was supposed to talk, and it was in the spring, and I was supposed to talk. And Jane and I were sitting in the restaurant when the phone rang, and somebody said, "Are you coming this morning to talk? You're already 30 minutes late." And another time, the president called me to remind me of the time change. And so anyway, I was here on time, and I started. And 40 minutes later, the president walked in because they had called me, then they forgot. My talk this morning is titled, Embracing the Unknown. When Wava called about 10 days ago to ask for the title of my talk, I had no idea what I was going to say. I didn't know the title. I didn't know what I would say, nor how I was going to say it. So all of that was completely unknown. So I thought that would be a great title. I decided to embrace the unknown rather than panic. I see embracing the unknown as something that all of us need to learn to do. Now, I caution you, I almost titled this talk, Plan B. Our lives are constantly filled with a progression of evolving unknowns, one after another after another. It seems that each time we get something settled, we turn to face another unknown and another and another. More often than not, we solve those unknown problems with Plan B because it doesn't always work out the way we had planned. And sometimes it's Plan C or D or E. Since we were children, there have been authority figures assuring us that they know all the answers. They know the secrets to the universe. Just obey this rule, or this law, or this dictum, or this commandment, and everything will work out perfectly. I struggle with that. I have struggled with it since I was a young person, and that was a very long time ago, because things just didn't seem to fall into place the way I was told. Ingrained, indoctrinated, instructed in a particular set of ideas or beliefs just seems to lock us into parochial ways of thinking. Problems arise when we become old enough to start thinking for ourselves. But it is hard to turn our backs on our history. And it seems that when we try to do that, we are constantly haunted by old truths. Gertrude Stein said the following, quote, "There ain't no answer. There ain't going to be any answer. There never has been an answer. That's the answer." Close quote. I tend to agree with Gertrude Stein. There is seldom an answer. Often there are many answers, and it's our responsibility to pick and choose what works best for us. Now, this brings up another really important question. If there are no answers to life's persistent questions, then is the mystery unknown? I believe it is. Therefore, I think that it is imperative that we each learn to find joy in the simple pleasures of life. Simply being together, falling in love, baking bread, sitting on a riverbank, driving to work, and the millions of other daily activities. Now, I tend to disagree even more with those who offer the idea that all of life is suffering. I don't think our lives should be dedicated to frustrations and struggles and tortures and disasters. I spent a lot of time pondering that question. And also how so many people can blindly accept ancient, outdated ideas. Mythological stories are wonderful. They're fodder for thought and discussion and for pondering. But to view all of our ancient mythological stories as factual stories seems unreasonable to me. To understand this behavior, I have tried to think of the reasons we might do that. And I come up with things like insecurity, biblical illiteracy, the need for affiliation, and perhaps just the simple inability to think logically for oneself. Why, if the eternal is unknowable, do we have to fill it with fantasy? What powerful need do we meet by filling the unknowable with fantasy? Why is it so impractical and unnerving to live with ambiguity? When I was in graduate school, I remember reading an article by several psychologists who said that the average adult has approximately 60,000 thoughts a day. However, 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts that we had the day before. This would lead us to conclude that religious thoughts are all in a long chain of yesterday's religious thoughts. So therefore, all religions are basically modifications of yesterday's religions. We human beings are complex bundles of conditioned reflexes, all stuffed into the cubic volume of our skin. Therefore, if 95% of all of our thoughts are yesterday's thoughts, then it is very easy to see how we can become trapped in yesterday's thinking. We certainly know that people seek the known, the comfortable, the familiar. This is the prison of past conditioning. And we are all locked in our own prisons of past conditioning. Seeing this replicated time and time again, we have to conclude that our prisons must be dear to us because we hold on to them. We will defend them even if it's harmful for us. In my opinion, the greater tragedy is that these prisons of past conditioning keep getting passed on to the next generation, millennia after millennia. There are millions of people today who passionately believe and defend 2, 3, 4,000-year-old ideas of how the universe works and how to deal with the universe. For thousands of years, superstitions seem to carry on from generation to generation to generation, and yet we will defend these to the death. We will even kill for them. When we become trapped in the stale repetitiveness of yesterday, and it seems like our minds are wasted on recycled ignorance. With this said, however, I think that it is a daunting task to break out of the cycle of rehashing these same old thoughts, because they are our history. Wilhelm Reich said the following, and I quote, "It is possible to get out of a trap. However, in order to break out of a prison, one must first to confess to being in a prison. The trap is man's emotional structure, his character structure. There is little use in devising a system of thought about the nature of a trap if the only thing to do in order to get out of that trap is to simply know it as a trap and to find the exit." Close quote. There are individuals who are capable of detaching from the past and seeing the world fresh. They're able to taste the joy and experience the wisdom of uncertainty. Uncertainty is the gateway to wisdom, because in uncertainty we must question, explore, experiment, challenge, and discover. The known may feel secure and comfortable, but the unknown is exhilarating. There's nothing that gets your heart pumping like not knowing where you're going or what you're going to do when you get there. It becomes imperative, I think, for a species that we embrace the unknown if we are to survive and thrive. There's a profound joy in exploring our world, making independent choices, feeling the experience. It's much more joyful than following sterile monotony of a prescribed life. If you have your choice, do you want a prescribed life, or do you want to invent your own life as you go along? We often act as though we have no free will, but free will can never be exercised unless we break out of the prison of past conditioning. We have to dare to think and behave based on our own experiences of life. We will never know what's around the corner if we're not permitted to look around the corner. Now, I'd like to go back for a moment to the topic of mythology. Mythology is a guidepost to our past, and they can be metaphors for our life today and our life in the future. Metaphors can be a very powerful guiding force in our life. I think one of my favorite characters in mythology is that of Prometheus. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to human beings. He saved humanity, but what often happens, of course, if we risk something, if we challenge something, we put ourselves in harm's way. Perhaps it's because of that metaphorical Prometheus that there have been so many Prometheans in human history. That's a person willing to put themselves in harm's way to save others. We have just seen countless acts of this with the Hurricane Sandy. In idle times, I would suggest that you think about the people that you have known or heard of who are willing to swim against the tide of conventional thought, to take on the establishment, to rescue others, to whistle-blow. There are people in this very room who are willing to defy the lords of orthodoxy and fundamentalism. The only way you can experience the joy and exhilaration of confronting the unknown is to step out of the known, to remove yourself from the past, the predictable, and the safe. Now, I caution you that the odds are not good for Prometheans, because I think that for every one person who is willing to challenge old ways of thinking, there must be 10,000 people who are locked in yesterday's thoughts. If we look around, we can find some good news for Prometheans, but there's not a lot. For example, old Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition just settled a race discrimination suit for some $300,000. A dozen black plaintiffs stated that they were made to enter the headquarters through the back door, not allowed to go through the front door, and they were excluded from daily prayer. Just before his death, Jerry Falwell's turnout at his traveling road show dropped dramatically. He was also on the hot seat because of his declaration that Muhammad was a terrorist. Now, personally, I was never at a loss for things to chuckle about as long as Jerry was around. He was a comic writer's best friend. Jerry's son now declares himself a victim of the wolf pack media and you liberals. He compares himself to Jeremiah. It's been interesting during this political season to watch politician after politician wear their religion on the sleeve, each trying to out-God the other. When I see all this happening, I think that we are in short supply of people like Robert Ingersoll. I don't know if you've ever read Ingersoll, but he was known as the great agnostic. He drew huge crowds every time he talked in public. This is what he had to say about church and state. And I quote, "Church and state should be absolutely and totally divorced. Presidents and governors should never issue religious proclamations. It is outside and beyond their authority. There is nothing in the Constitution to justify this religious impertinence." Close quote. Just to think of the religious legislation that fundamentalists would like to see passed would include abortion legislation, birth control legislation, prayer and school legislation, school vouchers, sexual discrimination, faith-based initiatives, anti-homosexual laws. There are even those who would disqualify other religions by labeling them as undesirable religions. These would include Islam, Wiccans, and several others. Legislation has been drafted, but not approved, that would allow churches to spend as much as 10% of their revenues on political campaigns. Can you think about the wink and nod power that big churches in this country would have if religious legislation like that were passed? I am reminded, when I think of Prometheans, of Helen Thomas, the White House reporter, who served under 6 or 7 different presidents, I don't remember. She called George Bush's hand. She reminded him that he was a secular president and not a missionary. We have seen in our time where religion was equated with patriotism. And I think we must never forget that during the 9/11 tragedy and other bombings and Hurricane Sandy, that not one policeman or fireman ever asked the victim, "What God do you worship?" or "Do you believe in Jesus?" This tells me that the Promethean spirit still resides in human beings, regardless of how uncertain the times. Believers and non-believers both helped and received help without any religious declaration or proclamation. I am still mystified that in the 21st century we have seen book burnings in fundamentalist churches. Topping the list of the worst books was Harry Potter, because it was of the devil or a masterpiece of Satan. In an effort to promote reading in this country, many libraries set up what they called Hogwarts Awards. But that reading program had to be scrapped because of religious complaints. The censors felt like they could burn these books because they were gifted with the truth. And I remind you, it is truly a dangerous thing when any person or any group thinks they own the truth. Who knows what would have happened had they ever read Shakespeare? There's a ghost in Hamlet, 3 witches in Macbeth, interracial dating in Othello, and suicide in Romeo and Juliet, just to mention a little of the mischief. Now, I certainly wouldn't begin to mention the sex and violence in the Bible. I don't know if any of you noticed, but this past week, the former Chief Justice Roy Moore of the Alabama Supreme Court is back in the news. He wants his old job back. Now, fortunately, he is challenged by a more liberal thinker, Circuit Court Judge Bob Vance. Although Roy Moore is the Tea Party darling, Bob Vance has raised more campaign money. You'll remember Roy Moore's stunt. He smuggled a 4-foot-tall, 5,280-pound granite sculpture of the 10 Commandments into the state judicial building. The good news is that Bob Vance is expected to win. I recently read an article about a survey of children who took a family life education course funded by the federal government for the purpose of teaching sex education. It seems that the children were completely unaware that the course had anything to do with sex education. It was so watered down that it promoted only abstinence. There's always a mischief afoot. The road is always unknown. As human beings, we can seek mythical hiding places, or we can embrace the unknown. The important thing is we should always risk stealing fire from the gods and demigods. Ralph Waldo Emerson described these people as little potentates. Perhaps caution should be observed when it comes to challenging these people. John Adams said, and I quote, "But touch solemn truth in collision with the dogma of a sect, and though capable of the clearest proof, you will soon find that you have disturbed the nest, and the hornets will swarm about your eyes and hands. They will fly in your face and eyes," close quote. As we approach Thanksgiving, I remind you that Thomas Jefferson certainly disturbed the nest by refusing to issue a religious Thanksgiving proclamation. For this and other secular decisions, he was attacked as a godless atheist, which he was not. Most of life is unknown. There are no guarantees, no absolutes, no warranties, no assurances that we can absolutely depend on. Therefore, we must learn to coexist with uncertainty. Free will means to think freely, to choose freely, to act freely. It does not mean that you are free only if you follow the established rules, doctrines, and dogmas. Carl Jung, a great free thinker, said, "This is all a part of that mindless babbling that characterizes so much of religious education." To make our journeys joyous, we must give up thinking that we can simply control the eternal by confessing that it is all powerful and that we are but helpless sheep. One of the beauties of life is that after we have lived a little while and we have accumulated more candles on our cake, we begin to realize that life can't throw anything at us that we haven't already dealt with. Before I conclude, I'd like to say just a few words about the unknown. To begin with, we are all stubbornly wedded to the unknown. There is little that any of us will do that is for sure and absolute. Therefore, it means we need to embrace the unknown. If you will, go with the flow. To embrace the unknown will always require both a healthy dose of doubt as well as trust. With that said, we should leap into the unknown, knowing that where we end up is exactly where we were meant to end up. Wisdom and trusting in yourself comes from risking and finding out you survived. When we risk and find out we survived, we have wisdom and we begin to trust in ourselves. Perhaps the precursor to wisdom is courage. If that's true, then we should all tell our egos that it is absolutely okay to step into the unknown, even if it means we will be different. It seems that the survival of humankind is a direct response to wanting to know what's around the corner, the unknown, and that is what has pushed us forward. As we each walk through the maze of the unknown, we have to know that we are walking in the footsteps of all of those heroes who have led us forward and taken us beyond where anybody thought we could be. To know that we do not know is an incredibly powerful position to be in. To acquire more and more and more knowledge doesn't necessarily make things more comprehensible, but in fact, it makes things more mysterious. In the end, we can all plan all of these activities in our life, but life will still throw us unexpected curves. Our character will be determined by how we deal with those curves, not by what curves come our way. We are here, and it is now. And beyond that, we don't know much. So, in conclusion, my wish for each of you is that your journey will be joyous, your resolve will be steadfast, that all of your enemies will be lightweights, and that you will learn to embrace the joy of the unknown.